Kimberly Braun is a spiritual luminary, retreat leader, and author, and a former Carmelite nun with a profound passion for guiding others into lives of deep connection, presence, and purpose. After spending 10 years meditating, chanting, living in community, and learning about presence, Kimberly's life is rooted in contemplative practice, but her mission now radiates outward, helping individuals integrate spiritual wisdom into everyday intimacy, expression, and embodiment. Through TEDx talks, immersive workshops, private coaching, Kimberly blends mysticism with playfulness, sensuality with soul. Her journey, moving from the cloister to community, from solitude to shared sacredness, makes her a uniquely compelling voice on how intimacy with self and others can be the doorway to divine experience. Gosh, there's a lot there. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today from Colorado.
Oh, I feel very blessed to be with you. And what a great intro. Like, oh my gosh, that's
For you, that's who you are. But if I did want to take you back a little bit, if that's okay, just to try and understand what your teenage, your formative years were like. What was it about those that helped shape the person you went on to become?
well, I think in all honesty, all of our experience shapes us. So it's really more our reflection on our experience that gives us the verbiage to share on these levels. I would say that from my earliest recollections, my life has been deeply cool. So it's like an orientation. So I think maybe part of my soul contract with coming in, part of my personality is oriented towards the beyond in general. And so with that, it opened me up to what reality was beyond this 3D idea of what reality is. And I felt from an early age, because of actually my gifts of empathy, and I know empathy is in your title, I felt a very deep interconnectedness with all things. And that has two sides to it, right? It has the way that's life-giving, to find the consolation that our belonging and our community is an interconnected experience. So that has let me be heart to heart and soul to soul with people all my life. And on the learning side of that, it also, if you're open to the unknown facets of that, opened to me to parts of myself that I didn't understand what was happening, because I was perceiving information that was maybe not my own information, maybe other energy, other subtle energy. And so I grew up with that high sensitive realms. But what gave me a lot of stability in that and direction was the fact that for me, the faith construct I was in my family organization, in our church, and that it opened me up to the power of ritual as a way of connecting to the divine. And that was very big for me. I mean, it was like, it was bar none my greatest source of happiness. And everything became aware to me through my way of thinking about things, that everything became a setup for an experience. So everything in a way became a ritual. Taking a walk in right before our podcast, a ritual experience, opening my senses to the beauty of life and the beauty of nature around me. You know, so many aspects that it opened me up to. And I had the unique experience of when deeper questions arose, like I had some early childhood trauma, and on a deeper level, I was like, what is life about? Why am I here? And it seemed to me in my language then that a personal source that I call beloved would whisper within me needed to bring about healing and understanding for me, just for me. And all of those experiences happening all through my life, it has opened me up more and more to the nature of reality, being far more than what we grasp, and being benevolence on an essence level, being love in the best sense of that word. So, there's lots of stories that go into that, but that's a bit of the consistent theme that's been there. As life happens, something deeper opens up in me as almost like an open question. And with that comes an answer that's very life-giving for my mind and my heart, and has led me down that path of what does it mean, and what's the adventure, and how can I understand our development as a human being, and how can I be of service to what I call the awakeness to our essential nature that is divine. So, and I continue to be on the edge of my own truth. I know that this conversation itself might lead me to say, oh, that's not true for me anymore. And then because some new truth will replace it.
And at what point in your life, not necessarily a time, but what was it in your life that made you decide to become a Carmelite nun and join a monastic order? Because that's quite a big step from having a spiritual connection, from being able to listen and hear answers and to understand who you are. It's still a big step then to sort of say, right, I'm gonna be a nun and I'm gonna join this monastic order, and things are gonna be, like I say, very ritualized. When and how and why did that come about?
It is, as I look back on it, a pretty big tapestry of a lot of experiences happening in a 4-year period. And what happened was my mystical experience exploded in probably the second half of being 19 years old. Like, it just was, I was like Eckhart Tolle living on the park bench. Like when you hear of mystics who like are unintegrated into society at a certain point in their development, that magnitude of these experiences happened in such a way, everything was it. And with that, and being young, I was looking out at the world only with those glasses on. So my decisions, like, do I get a degree? Because I was in college. Do I go do this? Do I go do that? Those questions didn't arise in that way, because my only questions were, how do I open up more to the beloved, which was my language? Because what was happening was, and now I understand more about subtle energy, my crown chakra was opening in really dramatic ways, and I was getting these rushes of this white energy rushing through me, and I would be taken into these deep states of what felt like a union with God. It felt like I was making love with God. And again, my language around that's changed, because that was like 40 years ago now. 40 years ago. And so I don't know that I to a personal God in the same way, but there was something incredibly intimate and personal. And in it, what I noticed, Andrew, was I was growing, I was maturing. My ways of thinking, my emotional development, like I was maturing in these experiences, and that was not lost on me. It wasn't just about the experience. It was about, I liked who I was becoming and what was happening. Within that time period, there was a lot of synchronicity. It was like, it was a honeymoon period. Have you been in those longer states where it's like everybody gives you exactly what your heart was longing for, and you get goosebumps, and it all speaks to you, and the pages are lit up? And that was happening every day during this 4-year period. And it was just undeniable. I couldn't not be saying yes to the direction that was naturally happening for me. And within that time period, lights began to show up in my life. First was Teresa of Avila, a mystic from the 1500s that's still very loved and relevant today. And she came in like a personal friend. It came through one of her books, but then she began showing up in my life as my sister, and as almost like I was part of her religious community. And it just began to to naturally, she became a part of my life. And then it happened with Therese of Lisieux, another Carmelite who lived in the late 1800s. And then John of the Cross, and then Edith Stein and Elizabeth. And this whole contingency of all these Carmelites started showing up. And while I felt intimacy with Francis of Assisi, and like I'm giving all these Catholic names. And so if you listen to this podcast, know that I'm not Catholic anymore. And I don't feel a sense of belonging in that construct. And I was in a very innocent way. And I felt close to everybody, you know, Francis and Clare and all these mystics of these other traditions. But the Carmelites were the ones that kept showing up with miracles and signs and revelations through reading their texts. And then synchronistically, not surprising, right? I ended up going on a hike. I lived in Santa Cruz at the time. And my friend who I hiked with grew up in Carmel. And I had no idea that there was a Carmelite monastery there. So we went to a Saturday liturgy there. And it was like I was walking into home. That's how it felt. It just dropped in. And I began to feel excited about joining that monastery, which I didn't, but that particular monastery. And the thought of being with the beloved night and day and chanting and meditating and contemplating and just being in that luminous presence and growing in what that meant in the silence, everything excited me about it. It was such a call. I can speak to the idea of call from the inside out because it was such a call, because I couldn't have sought it outside of myself. I couldn't have said, I'm going to seek God by joining a monastery. That's not at all what happened. It was this intimacy already happening. And I just, as a young, zealous woman, more. And it took years, and then the right monastery showed up, and I joined it. And looking back, and you'll probably appreciate this, I was torn because there were ways that the monastery I was going to join did not resonate with me, but there were others that resonated with me. And I realized that now in my development now, had I said no, I probably would have found a home in a monastic tradition that was less conservative. But I couldn't have known what I didn't know. I only knew Christianity and Catholicism. I had gone to a Zen Buddhist place and really liked it, but it was so unfamiliar to me, having grown up in Ohio. And, you know, we're so enculturated with our choices. So it was right for me. So I joined there and found a great solace in the experience. A lot of good there. A lot of good. Yeah. So
And what was your relationship like with people before going into the monastery? I guess not. I guess when you tried to explain to people what you were feeling, what you were seeing, what you were hearing, what you were sensing, what you were letting come into your life, not everybody could perhaps have been as, I don't know, accepting or understanding, or were people confused by the absolute steadfast nature of your belief? Is that the right word? I don't know. Yeah. How did your friends and family and yeah, I don't know, boyfriends at the time, whatever, how did they understand what you were experiencing?
with family, it was bag. Because we grew up charismatic, which means we had a home that was really into gifts of spirit, so healing and things like there was a receptivity and a softness, but I didn't talk a lot about all these experiences. I was so satisfied in the solitude that I didn't confide that much. And then what happened in Santa Cruz when I was living there, I happened chanced into a small group of people that were all experiencing a lot of explosiveness. It was like the universe kind of like, whew, and I think it was about 7 of us out. And it was clear the way Spirit was working with us all. So even though we didn't maybe talk about a lot of things, we were drawn together and we were witnessing a lot of unusual things happening for each of us.
Mhm.
So I was blessed in that I was in an understanding environment. And because then I was not in a larger community where there'd be more misunderstanding, it was a bit sheltered. And if I had been like where I did share it, where it was a less acceptable kind of thing, I met with a lot of misunderstanding. You know,
Mm.
um, delusional, am I delusional? Possessed, off the wall, ungrounded, you know, like all of those sorts of words came to me whenever I shared certain things outside my very intimate circle. And then I made a choice to go to a university in Ohio that was charismatically rooted. So there were all of these gifts happening in a massively big way. So I put myself in an environment that was really conducive to me saying yes to everything that was happening. And I entered the monastery from that community in Ohio. I did not finish my degree. My spiritual director at that time supported me in just bypassing that in the monastery. So I would say that I chose very almost cloistered environments in which to be saying yes to all of these gifts. I would say that looking back on it, I don't know where in society where I particularly belonged. You know,
Mm.
it definitely uprooted, you know, as a young adult, first time out on your own, right? First time completely finding yourself out in the world, out of your family structure. I was very unrooted because these experiences were all consuming, and I saw that they didn't fit in with the normal ways kids around me at that age were finding themselves. I had no interest in drinking. I had no interest in like free sex. I had no interest in even not even those more extreme environments. I had so little interest in like planning for a financial future
Mm-hmm.
or you know things you're considering when you get a degree or what is it I love to do I want to be a nurse do I want to be a pilot like those questions were so trumped by the overwhelming experience that for better or worse I didn't really know how to answer those questions or even ask them. Life was so fulfilling in the way that it was. So I didn't fit in my larger culture. So I was lucky that I had close friends and I had a family that was my mom and dad were very non-judgmental people by nature. So they really supported us kids in freely choosing our direction, and they would back us. So, but I will admit that my dad, who's very grounded and as Christian as they were, when I did confide about I was going to, my dad was concerned it was a cult, and understandably so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and had I taken more heed to what he was saying, I probably wouldn't have joined because it was very conservative. I mean, I didn't know I wasn't going to be allowed to visit my family. I didn't think to ask those questions, you know, like, but I was young in my development.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was young. When we're young like that and experience overwhelms us, where do we gain perspective? And I think as young kid at that young part of our development, if something's overwhelmingly good, we oftentimes just go with it. Yeah.
So is it possible to say how you changed and evolved through the time at the monastery? What what did you recognize about yourself when you came out that was different from when you joined?
I would say my embodied experience of eternal was was much further developed and developed a capacity in me to recognize it regardless of belief system, culture. I became very universal. In the silence, ideas I had were broken down. And it's interesting because people would oftentimes think the opposite, right? If you join a Catholic conservative monastery, you're probably going to become more fundamentalist in your belief. But the opposite happened for me. I also became more at home in my own journey. The silence worked very well for me because we are much of what we are, and I know that you know this reading your podcast and who you are, we're largely unconscious. And this unconscious comes forward to be healed and transmuted and seen and loved. And silence puts us in direct contact with that. And I healed some very deep conceptions about myself. You know, like I carried a deep wound that probably is fairly common in Western culture, you know, a certain degree of self-doubt or placement of power, a little, not a destructive level, but a low self-worth in some ways, where you look towards affirmation a bit. And that healed in some really dramatic ways. I had some of that shadow side with, come forward with all of its unsettledness. And I was given great, I believed I was called to be Carmelite, to presence it and to have the that it's not that I am loving or unloving, it's awakening that I am loved. And that knowing, grasping that knowing is very liberating. And I would say I'm not 100% there, but I'm large. I've come a long way in that realization. So there were ways that I was healed emotionally and psychologically. There was a purity, there was a washing of the enculturation that happens. Society can numb us and distract us and create ideas of where we belong that aren't ultimately true, that make it hard when we lose that belonging. And in some ways, I was set really free with those usually all human beings work through, and I got to fast track some of that. There's a way that even though I still have challenges in life, there's a way that my inner core of peace has remained untouched. And I think monastic life, with its silence and its chantation and its living off the land and healthy lifestyle, it just allowed me, in some ways that have been fundamentally allowed me to be of service. Now, I have found, because I have gone to areas of myself that were uncomfortable and also were brilliant. It's not just about facing the shadow side, it's about facing the brilliant side of the essence of who and what we are. I find that when people work with me or I'm doing in the world, there's no place I can't really go. And people usually experience the fruit of that, not by looking towards me, but by me being the mirror, and they encounter themselves and their own sense of resourcedness. And that is so satisfying. That makes me so happy that I could be of service in a way that is not positioning me like a guru, but is allowing me just to be a friend and provide the kind of presence that people then find their path of freedom. Yeah, that's light on some of us.
It's a very bright light. It's a very bright light. So you could have taken the decision, or not taken the decision, and sort of stayed in the monastery and lived in that silence and self-reflection and understanding, whatever, but you chose to step not step away, but step aside from that to communicate with other people and to sort of share this story. Was that what drove the desire to continue progressing? Was a sort of desire and an intention to share and to communicate with other people? Was that a big part of it?
I don't think so, which is really surprising. Because I grew up in a family that experienced the power of prayer, when I was in the monastery, I felt an intimacy with the world that people oftentimes misunderstand. They think I left the world, right? I was not of service. I'm not taking your question to be that at all. I don't feel that from, but it's a chance to speak to that contrast. It's like, well, here you are cloistered away from the world. But I felt just as much service. What happened was so unsought by me, and I think is part of my particular soul path, is I had an inner illumination that my next step of happiness with the beloved was leaving. And it's going to be in the book that I publish after this book I just published. It was such a powerful experience and unsought. And I'm still discovering what that even means. Next step in leaving, when it was like I was washed, it was like whoosh. It was a crown chopper thing. It was like whoosh. And then there was this grasp. And unknown to me, I was just house. I was walking around the monastery, kind of like, I mean, I knew I was wearing the habit, but it's kind of like, gosh, I'm wearing a habit. I'm walking. What was my sense of belonging and community? It was all gone. I was just walking around like this soul with these other souls. And I was like, wow, I don't really belong here anymore. It was so mysterious and at the same time that I just simply acted on it. It happened in August of 2000. Make that moment. It was so powerful. And I waited. I was wise enough to say, I don't know what this is that has happened. And I was right in the middle. I think what prepared me for it, I gotten a call in 1997 to build a monastery. And that's in my TED Talk on my website if you're listening to this podcast. And it's also my latest book, Miracles in the Naked Light, starts sharing that journey. And when I got that call, I said yes to it. And I had no idea. I'm making it sound like I'm living my life very blindsided, but these really big insights come not prefaced by a direct knowing it's going to come. And when I answered that call to build that monastery and then realized I was actually going to be the general contractor, it undid me with the level of gifts that I had, with the way I was relating to the community and permission for me to speak and not be cloistered and drive around and work with people. And it was moving through me. And I was literally in service constantly with me. And I really thought I was just going to go back to monastic life once that was over. And I think that probably prepared me for being ready for the washing moment. And so I waited. The monastery was dedicated 5 months later. And then that I wrote to Rome. That's what you had to do. Asked to leave, and I left on June 9th. It just that fast. It was within. I didn't go back and forth because there was nothing to go back and forth on in my heart. It was like next step. But I did all the right things of asking the right questions. Is this right? I made a life commitment. Is this really me following my path? And I was so at that time so enculturated as a Carmelite. My questions would be very different than now. Is this of God? Is this, and I speak about it very differently now. So it was all right. And I got lined up with a scholarship to leave. It was a massive change, Andrew. I had no idea what it was going to be like going from shaved head, habit, 10 and a half years, to wearing plain clothes, to being in a world that now had cell phones and internet, that didn't have computers when I had entered. Like, it was such a match. I was walking around like I was hit from every angle, like, oh my God, it was mass. And then 9/11 happened like 2 months after I had left. And, you know, so it was so it's the greatness of the call, because I never lost my peace. I may have been like batted around and shaken, but internally I was like in my joy. I was very strange to everybody. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't show my arms. I was so, adaptation took about a year before I could like wear a t-shirt. So, but was I thrived in. I'm a natural learner, and I thrived in it. And then naturally, I recognized that I loved the gift I had to hold presence for other people. So it was like a that. But I also loved, it was reciprocal. It was like I was of service, but I also focused my grad work on understanding languages involved in that, self-realization. I studied it, spiritual direction, studied it through different faith traditions. I studied it from Carl Jung's perspective of growing. I studied it from energy. I trained to be a Reiki master. I began to be a student of what does it mean to be on a journey, a human being, and how can I be of service? And it was a natural, happy place to let my words be of service to that too. And I love doing that, creating inspirational messages. And but I consider myself on the journey with everybody else. Yeah.
So in the Catholic Church, obviously we have the Bible, we have the Catechism, we have the Pope's teachings, we have different letters from the different ministries, etc., that will give us guidance and tell us what we should do and what God means to us and how to pray and everything really. So it sounds like your relationship with God or spirituality has evolved a lot since you left the monastery. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how it's evolved?
Wow. Similar to my personality as a little girl, I get very intellectual when experience reveals something about reality.
Okay.
And I'm really into that on a lot of levels, and I involve my mind in it. When something happens and I'm seeing all the different pieces of it, naturally says, what's true? Is this true? And I have some foundational beliefs that have never changed. And one of them is that all creation is being and becoming in this God source. And holding true to that has dismantled, aligned with that, and reinforce things that stay aligned with that. So I came from my Catholic upbringing and true, but then have destroyed teachings and writings that don't align with that in a way that or what seems to be the path of freedom to be an expression of God. So in ways very different, then that's why I can't say that I'm all parts of the creed. And to me, part of being part of a community is professing a creed. I mean, that's you can have the interpretations on the creed, is vital, and you're saying words like, I believe this, I believe that, without saying those words with all my heart. I don't say them with a little, but, and I have, from my perspective, which I know wouldn't be everyone's perspective. I know my I'm not really welcome in the Carmelite sphere of life because they believe I've lost my way. They believe that I belong as the Carmelite for life, and my choice to take this step was away from God, not in God or with God. And that was and a separation, but I respect that theology and that spirituality. And that has slowly happened. I was banned by a bishop back in 2007 because I was leading workshops that he did teaching. For me, they were in alignment with my seminary, but for him, they were not. So I would say that I have evolved in ways that my system believes that the paths are many and that these paths are more than known, and that this sense of an eternal source doesn't need to be named God, but could be named God. That could be a word that captures the dependent upon it. So whereas I would have had an exclusive God language before, I don't anymore. And my experience of what seems to be true has taken me along those paths. And I have found great into my Christ experience through a school from the 1200s. But the text that I enjoy, 1200s, that stands in direct contradiction to Christian structure, really fine alignment in those texts. And yet for me, my own experience, Christ in all the forms, Christ consciousness included, I find articulation in the different texts. And when that speaks to me, and when that lets me be of service to be a person of greater compassion, who is more available in deep intimacy with others, to hear their hearts, to care, to not put a stumbling block in somebody's path. When I see that being my deduction, then that keeps me going in that direction. So in some ways I'm exactly the same, and in other ways I'm markedly different. And that would be more from perspectives of me than my perspective of me. Makes me want to say, where does that take you?
No, I find myself getting lost in what you're saying in the most wonderful way. And I sort of forget what questions to ask. But you're a very it's not even engaging, just a very I don't know, a very understanding tone. Even when you're talking, you're understanding, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I need to listen back really to really understand what I understand. But gosh, so we were brought up as Catholics in a Catholic church, and I think one of the things with most churches or religions, or our definition of religion, is that a big part of the religion or the religious teachings is tell. So we're telling you this is how to pray and how to believe, and these are the sacraments, and these are the all these different things, and here's what you should do, shouldn't do, etc. And there's very little about what do you think? What are your views? What are your opinions? What does it make you feel? You don't really ever hear that when you. I remember being sort of taught for confirmation. You sort of go through all the sacraments, sort of outward sign of inward joy, and all those things. And it's. But there was I don't remember anything that being asked about. What do you think? What does that make you feel? How do you understand that? And I think that's one of the truisms, I guess, of structured religion, that they don't necessarily want people to challenge things or debate things. And it feels like you've done what very few people do, and sort of listen to the signs you've received. And I think, I don't know if it's a question coming, sorry. And I just thought it feels that that probably many people get signs and feelings and sensations and emotions, but somehow we've sort of lost the ability or the awareness to be able to hear them or accept them or embrace them. And you were saying one of the things that changed when you came out of the monastery, one of the things that changed in my lifetime is the advent of computers, smartphones, etc. And I walk down the street now, and it's or on a bus or on a train or whatever, and it's very, very rare that anybody, child or above, isn't on their smartphone. And it feels that we almost need constant distraction. There was a research study done I might have even been MIT that sort of challenged university students to be without their smartphones for an hour or whatever. And so something like 60% of them just couldn't cope with not being on their phones or knowing what's happening on social media, or just couldn't stand not being distracted. And it feels so much in contradiction to what you experience with being in stillness and being aware and being meditative, I guess, being in prayer. It just feels that we would be better off if we were able to spend more time without distraction. So I have no idea what the question is there, but I'll let you say something. So otherwise, I'll just keep talking. But does that make sense? That we're almost, we need more and more distraction to just keep us going, which seems such a negative.
I think where my inquiry goes around it, because I don't have a hard, fast sense, and I'm such an optimist, Andrew. So I'm always like, well, how's spirit working? There's like some, golden pot of gold at the end of this. But where I relate around it all is it in a culture, if evolution's happening. So like, you're probably familiar with the Jesuit theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who says that, really the omega point, that this is happening. Like, it is happening. It's not going to not. So if actually evolution is happening, then our desire for intimacy, our connectedness to realize the God, the consciousness, the God awareness within ourselves and others is going to continue to grow. Society always being challenged with that because of the fear-based way we still live, are limited, not false, limited charges of intimacy that we get from anywhere we put our attention. I go out and I, on the positive side, I go to a theater production with somebody, and I experience great intimacy with the theater production and next to me, and I feel closer with that person even though we didn't talk. Of intimacy that just happened, that's satisfying and life-giving. And then you get breakdowns. You're not being met, you're not being seen, you're not being heard. But I can jump on my phone and feel heard, and look at a meme that makes me laugh when I'm feeling stressed. I can connect into some viral video with 5 other million people that I don't know, but yet I So it's got this like a taste, a fragrance of intimacy to it, but knowing that that's not stabilizing anybody into, which means then that we remain in that sadness, whether the input is happening or not. Like FOMO's growing. So you've got surge and intimacy and connection growing because and the dismantling of walls and barriers breaks it open more. But then you've got the FOMO that's growing too, because you've got the anxiety that when you're not connected matrix, then you're alone. And so for me, when I go with the inquiry, I'm like, okay, well, if the device and is not liberating us, but rather entrapping us, it seems to be defeating our evolutionary processes. It seems to be at odds with it. So I'm there with that school of maybe less is more. Then you look on the other side, and I encounter some of these younger generations and their sharpness around cutting through limiting belief systems is so much more precise than older generations, because they've been globalized to not accept a norm. I'm like, okay, well, there's a good side. Trailblazing, they don't know where they belong. The structure broken down, but they're not giving up blind assents that are limiting just because they're told they need to belong this way. So then you've got an upside to it too that's happening. So I think that it's a complicated issue. I do agree with Deepak Chopra, who said recently that the pace with which we are developing technologically is not paced with our spiritual development, our emotional and our psychological development. That it's fast, and we're not meeting it with the maturation that is requisite for it to remain a tool only for good. I know it's a complicated answer, but I vacillate with it too, because I see ways that it's really benefiting certain parts of the culture. But I agree with you too that it is disappointing to be on, I'll visit a big city and be on the subway and every single person's on their phones. And, it's disappointing to be, I was just in Chicago for a conference, and, sensory delight of architectures all around. And, I couldn't really share it very deeply with any strangers around me, because they're looking down, on a phone and that. And so there is disconnect happening there. Yeah. But there's overwhelming challenges too. We're aware that we're killing our earth. We're aware that fear is driving us into possible extinction. Overwhelming if you feel disempowered as an individual. And it's a little bit of a relief to get distracted, isn't it?
It is, but there was some research came out this week that showed that the number one therapist, if you want to call it that, in the US was ChatGPT. So the number of people that would ask ChatGPT, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling emotional, I'm feeling upset, what do you reckon? That we're using ChatGPT as a therapist, which I think I completely concur with what you were saying about how quickly, and it's not even technology now. So I think we're still fairly adept with hardware, but I think when it comes to AI, I think one of the challenges is that I think a lot of the people that are developing AI aren't really quite sure what they're developing. So it's a little bit like if you're making a recipe for a new cake or something, and you have ingredients, you're not quite sure how they go together, and it's only when it's baked, it comes out the oven, and gosh, bananas and celery. Who thought that made a good? That's what it feels like with AI. That it's we're getting to this place where it is beyond our comprehension, which is kind of scary. And one of the things I really liked in your TED talk was you talked about embodying joy, and joy is a word that is very underused. I rarely hear the word joy anymore, which is a real sadness. And it feels that for perhaps a lot of people, joy has been replaced by having as opposed to being, if that makes sense. So we construct an idea that we're going to be happy and satisfied by having a newer car, a newer phone, and a newer whatever. And often replacements, not things that we need, but replacements, things we already have. As opposed to this morning, I took my dog out for a walk this morning, with just the two of us. I didn't have my phone with me. We just walked for an hour. It rained really hard. We both got very wet, and it was it was fun. It was good. She drank from puddles. I walked in puddles. We stopped and had a coffee, and she had a doggy sausage, and it was really enjoyable. And I thought, well, that doesn't cost me anything apart from the cost of the sausage and the coffee, but it was a joyful experience. And it wasn't having something. It was about being, if you like. And I do feel that we have this sort of comparison culture where we feel that happiness or success or fulfillment comes from possessions as opposed to, that's probably too big a word to say, understanding. But do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I tend where I land, because I oftentimes, because I've always shied away from the word spiritual leader, which has had its downsides because it's difficult to build a business if you don't want to put a title on yourself.
Own it. Yes, for goodness sake.
But in my spiritual leadership, I am constantly being asked questions, trying to give a big view of the present state of humanity. And I have to admit that I don't know how insightful I am around that, because my perspective goes to the whole human evolution. If we are consciousness awakening, so that's my belief, our consciousness awakening, wherever there is not awakening, there is, in the non-dual Shiva Tantra, ignorance, there's shrouding, there is a obscuring of being able to see things as they are, held by the individuation process. Because as an individual, we have in survival needs and all of that. And when I look at the big human experiment, we've had that base that we've been operating from since we came into where we would call ourselves, Homo sapiens, whatever the age was where we said, okay, now we're humans. Mm-hmm. We've had the same struggles and the same fears, and that played out. And the difference isn't that we're more distracted. The difference is that we've got more powerful material tools to lead us more quickly down paths that we couldn't. When we were isolated in communities without technology, you could only kill the people in your village. You couldn't kill the whole world, I guess it's a terrible metaphor, but and so that's my perspective, is that we're still like 3-year-olds. We've still got a lot of fear around existence and being here, and it's going to be okay, and how do I make it, and with that, we've got tools that accomplish good things or bad things, hurtful things or liberating things with great expedience. Agree with you that we have developed the care and the priority for emotional and psychological intelligence on a societal norm. and those that have power, that wield power. Like if you're a genius in developing AI, you may have been able to fly through all the schooling for that with caring that you develop the capacity to be emotionally intelligent as well, or psychologically or ethically intelligent. We just haven't valued things with enough priority in our culture, and that could do us in. That could do us in. Yeah. So that's my perspective on it, which again is very complicated, I guess. It's kind of simple, but kind of complicated.
So what does intimacy and love and relationships, what does that look like for you these days?
It's very present moment. And as I continue to evolve in this intimacy, and I love that word intimacy. That's why I really like the intimacy inquiry, because I use that word a lot. And a lot of times people in Western culture, they automatically think intimacy is sexuality, or they overlay ideas. And I'm like, no, you have no idea. Like, to touch a leaf and to drop in with a leaf is so intimate. Intimacy present moment. And in that moment, I'm growing in the intelligence of the field. So it doesn't preclude having movement. Like back when I was young, intimacy in the present moment. So when I didn't know how to plan to have food tomorrow, like I was like, but now I'm more integrated. Intimacy in the present moment contains the intelligence of all the layers of the field. So I have a business, and I have ways that I'm of service that have structure to them, and responsibility and responsiveness. And I continue what intimacy means. What does it mean to have a good conversation with somebody? What does it mean to hear and be heard? How can I learn more about what it means? It continues to undo me, and it continues to be my joy.
It's a funny word, isn't it? 'Cause for me, I feel this is probably one of the most intimate hours I've had this week. Actually, longer than this week, in terms of having an intimate, because we quite rarely have actually intimate conversations with another person where we ask questions and we listen and we respond, and we don't just talk on a superficial level. We really want to understand what somebody's saying, how perhaps they're feeling, and I do think intimacy for me is really about, exactly as you say, very much being present at that time, and having a desire to understand. I mean, like say, whether that be understand the flower I just walked past, or the noise I've just heard, or the person I'm talking to. But I think intimacy is very much about desire to understand, a desire to connect, really. And I did want to talk about your book, Miracles in the Naked Light, and I think a lot of that to me was about intimacy, is about intimate connections. And a couple of questions. I've often thought it's probably one of the hardest things to do is to realize this thought that, okay, I'm going to write a book, through to, oh look, there's my book on a bookshelf. How was the process of creating a book? Was it a joyful process? Was it frustrating? Was it, were the words just there when you came to write them down? How was the process of writing?
It's why I could probably never coach somebody with writing. For some reason, I'm a waterfall of content.
Okay.
It just rushes through me. I may enter a time when I have writer's block or communication block. I know that could happen. So far, it has not happened. It's the process itself. And part of it is that I have a confidence around communication and around my own motivation, that I really do communicate for the sake of this. And I have a lot of confidence in that. And that then leave me sabotaging communication. For instance, like I am more likely to put a book out there that needed more editing than to say I need to edit it 25 times to get it right. Because I have a lot of confidence in the essence part of things. And the downside is I can always use a lot more editing. First book that came out, editing. And I look back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh. I had a publisher this time. I loved them reading the text and giving feedback and hearing that. And I loved it. It was harder from the business standpoint. I tend to move very fast. Yeah. Things right, and I get the sign like, okay, I'm meant to do this. Man, I'm a fire sign, and I just go for it and go at it. And publishers, they worked very hard with me, but of course they have a process. They have a whole team, and the content development can only get to it on this day, and working with the marketing strategies and how I would normally go about things was really where my learning curve was, because things took longer and I couldn't just whip together allotments for the book in dance with when it would be published and when it would be on Amazon and when it was leading around that. So I softened my service around the message. So the book, I definitely have the childlike, like, oh my gosh, it's a book. Like when the box came, I'm like, oh, absolutely. I definitely had that joy of like, and that hasn't faded. It's been out 2 years now, and it still hasn't faded. And the bit of my personal dilemma around writing a book is that I know what's in that book falls short of reality. And just being like, okay, this book is is simultaneously relevant and irrelevant at the exact same time. And that's my kind of reality around it. So I have this excitement around it. And at the same time, like, it's all irrelevant as well. Like how I've said it and how I'm short of ultimate reality. So there you have it. So I've got those are my mixed responses around it.
And what's the next book?
So the book that will come out, which will be my 4th book, is the finishing of the monastery story that leads to all the illuminations that led to me leaving. And if you read my first book, because I walk out the door of the monastery and join the monastery in Texas, but you're like, oh, I was going to get the whole story. Everybody wants the whole story in like 200 pages. And like, no, but there's the evolution of belief and thought are so worth more time. And in my books, I let you go on the journey of where I change. And if I don't give voice to those stories of what changed me or what opened me to change, you're just bookends. You're just getting the why'd you enter, why'd you leave? Yeah. And for me, I care a lot more about the mechanism, the agency around change, because that's where we come to freedom. So that's why the books are more drawn out, is that I have a sharp memory and I remember a lot of what changed me. And that's where the juice, the final step of leaving, that's a massive step. But all that led up to it was just as juicy, where I changed my relationship with sin, where I changed my relationship to what it means to be a co-creator, where I changed my relationship to what it means to be in vows, where those are major changes, So that's I love the process. I wish if I made a lot more money, I would write a lot more books. It's fairly lucrative, No. But if or when I'm really wealthy, I will write 15 more books. I would love to give myself that much time every day just to write. And I'm going through my guidance that's what I'm meant to do. It's just meant to be there as a desire. So
I've read some things that you've said about manifestation, and it's a word that people use a lot. And I was just thinking, as I was thinking of the question, do you think that manifestation is another word for prayer? Is that what people mean when they talk about manifesting something?
I love the word prayer. I don't use it so much because people have all these ideas about it that put them back into structures that weren't life-giving. And I do think it's part of the agency. So where I'm at now in my belief system, which I haven't fully realized, just believe it's so, and I'm still learning what it means, is that we're consciousness coming into form for the experience expression as consciousness. There's this divine paradox. And in that being so, the essence of what I am as consciousness is naturally generative and creative. Every human being, not just me, but I'm using me to make it really simple.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at my essence, I'm generative and creative beyond my fathoming. And my building the monastery is a good example of that. If that's so, then when I open desire that wells up within me on that level, and it shows itself in prayer, that prayer itself is part of the manifesting action, because prayer is part of form. Prayer is movement from the formless into form, because a thought is form, energy is form, or loosely these things are form. And so yes, I think prayer is part of, when prayer is arising from the essential part of my being that is a divine desire, then it's part of the manifestation process. And how there's a becoming element to that, where I may not see it for my eyes, like a prayer may, like when that prayer arose for silence monastery, part of the manifestation was hearing build the permanent monastery, which didn't arise independent of the prayer. The prayer was part of that process, that arising from within mysteriously of this something I didn't have before, that I was meant to have silence more. So I do think that prayer is part of it, but it's kind of a an effect. And we tend to try to make it linear. I said a prayer and my knee healed. We tend, and I think it's more that that good shows up in inspiring us to assent to the possibility of healing. And in that we open to pray, and in that prayer we open to the unknown makes it possible for the shifting of material things to happen. The healing happens. That's me thinking out loud. Break it down to make it less linear.
No, I 100% agree that we often sort of say, oh, well, I'll say a prayer for you, or I'll pray for this, or it literally is that, yeah, I pray that this happens, or that this doesn't happen. And it is, yeah, it does feel very linear. But sometimes I think that prayer in general, and I've no knowledge of this or proof of this, whatever, it is almost us putting energy back into the universe or the cosmos, or whatever you think of. And I think that we're made up of, that we are energy, that everything is energy around us, etc. So I think prayer and manifesting and meditation and silence and all those things, that they're almost sort of recharging the energy that surrounds us, without a particular focus, but it's recharging. I'm explaining that terribly, but it feels more. It feels like it's energy. We're expounding as opposed to anything else.
I love that. I love that. That's a wonderful way to speak about it. That I hope that is true too. And there's enough research now, right? Scientific research that verifies that things shift when people pray. You'll see changes happen, even on the cellular level.
Yeah. And I did Reiki training, gosh, years and years ago. And the Reiki master that trained us, they did experiments with Reiki over water, and the chemical makeup of the water molecules change. You think, well, this is energy change, is physically changing something. I think a lot of people are very suspicious or nervous about energy and how it's used, but I do hope and feel that we are perhaps connecting more with excuse me, many of the things that we've probably known or have been known for centuries and centuries, but we've discounted them because they're not something that's been made, or it's not something that we've bought. It's just something that we've known, really. And I look back at different societies, different parts of the world that have had incredible knowledge for so many years, indigenous populations, etc. And I think, gosh, we're only now accepting it as knowledge after centuries and millennia of perhaps it being out there. And I think there's so many more things that we don't know than we do know, obviously. And I do hope that people are curious. And I do love, I love being curious. Sometimes, I would say curious to kill the cat, but I do think being curious and asking questions of ourselves is one of the fundamental things that we should do. This is quite a selfish question, so you don't have to answer it. But so my mum and dad both died within the last 2 years, and with your knowledge and lived experience, what do you know of what happens after we leave this physical entity?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I was just a speaker at a near-death experience conference. I experienced when I was 19, but I was speaking more to just it generally. Where I'm at now, which is so unsatisfying for so many people, even in a lot of spiritual experiences, I think there are many planes of consciousness around this question, and they all hold truth. For instance, that we are multidimensional beings, and that essentially we are a source created. So therefore, we kind of finish this part of our journey that kind of is held in this. What happens and where we go is largely influenced by the way consciousness has wanted to have a pattern of what happens. So, like for some that have an NDE, they white light and they see their loved ones, and they see religious figures that are important, and there's truth there to that. And then you have others that have a completely different experience, where there's no white light. Like for me, I was absorbed into the luminous void of allness that was very liberating. And I was so Christian at the time. So you would have thought I would have seen Jesus and Mary and my family, but I didn't. And I do think that if souls are intended to still be participants in this world, then we're going to feel their closeness, and we're just with them, and we'll see visions of them, or there'll be signs and there'll be support systems. And if that's not meant to for us, if it's not part of our evolutionary path, it won't matter to us. We won't feel lack. Just like if past lives, if that helps you grow in an essential freedom of who you are, you're gonna find great solace there. If it doesn't, you do something because you don't believe in past lives or you don't give time to it. I personally experience a deep connection with all my family that has passed. And I experience them coming into my life. I experience them giving messages and signs. And so for me, for some reason, my soul path, having that is a really big, important part. Yeah, and I don't, other makes me really happy to have them still in my life and to not have that loss, even the loss.
Well, thank you for answering that question. Yeah.
Does that for any consolation for you? That's a big loss. So sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you. But no, it's funny. So I was with my dad when he passed away, and I could absolutely knew the moment his soul left his body. Absolutely knew the moment that happened without looking at the machines or anything else. And I took comfort, and a bit like you said, in that soul energy, where you want to call it, being absorbed back into, as you call it, the luminosity that exists. And I think it's a lovely way to think about it. I've kept you for a long time, sorry, but I just have one more question, if that's okay.
Sure.
And maybe it's an odd one, but I wonder what because there's something you've talked about before, but what your definition of home is. Is it a place? Is it a practice? Is it a belief? What is home?
Wow, that's a question, and it's not surprising me you're asking it because I just continue to have it changed and dismantled. My learning has been that home is and when and how, not even how, the when and where I am operating as essence. And even when it doesn't mean that I'm to the desire for home being with me. For instance, I find home where there's connection. So where there's a deep connection with somebody, I feel at home. Where there's not, when I'm showing up, connect deeply, it doesn't feel so much like home. Home continues to be less and less material. I love what it points to. And I dig illumination around this when I was a novice in the monastery, because we would celebrate Christmases so amazing growing up. I loved it. We'd get up before sunrise, and my dad loved to bake, so he coffee cake and homemade cocoa, and we'd sit with candles, coffee cake, and a lot of times he had to work on Christmas Day as a fireman, so we would have our little Christmas before. And I have all these belonging memories from Christmas days, in particular Christmas. And when I entered the monastery, my first Christmas, as rich as it was in the monastery, I had also given up something that was really, really important to me. And I had a vision of me sitting in front of a Christmas tree, and my sister was there, my mom and dad were there, and one by one, all the elements and all the joy, not the joy, but the joy from all the elements in that, one by one, they began to disappear. Like the presents disappeared, and the tree did, and my sister disappeared, everything, and the home disappeared. And I was sitting there with just these things, and the last thing that was there was my dad, because I have the kind of connection I have with him. And then he disappeared. And in that raw experience, what rose up for me was that none of that had gone away, and that it was still alive in me as a belonging immaterially. But that came through the experience with my dad. Disappeared. My first response was anguish. Oh my gosh, up having these moments till the end of my life to cry, and then the essence of that connection kind of like lit up, and I realized I was losing none of that in a different way. So home, very immaterial to me, but it doesn't mean I don't have home places, like going to be with my family for a holiday, or having a great intimate time with my friends, or being out in nature. Being on a trail is very much a home for me. Yeah.
That's perfect answer. Well, I felt very much at home talking with you. So I just want to thank you so much for your for just being so open. I mean, you sort of said before we started nothing was off limits, and you've just expose yourself in the most powerful, positive way. So I've got a lot from the conversation, even if nobody else listens to it. I think I know they will, but it's been I'm really excited to see the next 15 books. If that isn't your but no, thank you. I appreciate what you're doing.
There.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been awesome being with you, and thank you for questions that allow us to be in this space together.